Hello and welcome back to another tutorial video. Today I'm doing my 25.13 mid-lane Tierlist served your content. Like, subscribe, and let's get into it. It was a very small patch. This was the second part to the original 25.12 MSI patch. These are mostly follow-up changes, so the likes of Twisted Fates have been nerfed slightly. We've seen a slight nerf towards Rise as well, as there were fears that these two champions would become very dominant at MSI. Twisted Fate does look to have become that dominant at MSI. He looks to be the #1 priority mid laner, so that is definitely something to talk about. Aurelia got buffed. It was very early game skewed. Does make her more impressive at what she was already quite good at. That level 1 to all the way to bulk spike, and then second item. She is still a very, very strong champion. You need to sink a lot of time into her though to get good results. And then GP and Nidley received slight buffs. In the case of GP, they wanted to kind of give them some compensation for the grass nerf towards range champions in the previous patch. And for Nidley, they gave her some more Q damage through the extension range modifier, which is nice for both jungle and mid lane Nidley. Obviously, mid lane Nidley is something which I will cover a bit more in depth when I get to it, but has kind of caught on over the last patch or two. Let's get into it. So the DT is going to consist of the same champions, the likes of Ezreal, Varus, all Sword, all kind of fit in the same vein of Fort, where these champions can function in mid lane if you just give them a lot of gold. Obviously, they are going to be similar to their bot lane counterparts. They are just very vulnerable to being ganked. Obviously, not having the same level of a lot of in the case of a lot of these champions, they've been pushed more towards gold scaling than level scaling as well, which is why they don't traditionally do as well in mid lane anymore, because of just fears of taking over competitive. Having ranged options as AD options in the mid lane pool, very, very powerful. It's why things like Jace have it's kind of and Yone have existed even when maybe they weren't in their stronger states. Obviously, Jace at the moment is in a relatively good state. Yone isn't for solo queue for the most part, but anyway, I digress. These champions have definitely had a lot of levers put in place to kind of move them away from mid lane. Plus, if their wave clear has definitely been nerfed down quite substantially, then they don't then they're more vulnerable to being ganked, which is why Tristana and Sworda, for example, had modifiers kind of put in place to kind of make their wave clear a bit worse, or just were nerfed in that aspect and then buffed up elsewhere. Corki also within the same vein of thought. In the case of Azir, he's incredibly powerful at the very top end of play in competitive primarily. Even in Elite, he's not as performant anymore. This champion is probably going to be, for the most part, the most Elite skewed or competitively skewed pick within the game. And that's fine. That is kind of what you expect when it comes to Azir. He has incredible control. He's an AP hyper carry. He has a lot of tools which are just very unique to him. And I think that is a pretty solid place for this champion to be. So Azir, a pick I will never recommend for average elo brackets. He requires too much time investment. Even if you're really good at piloting the champion, a lot of the time you'll find that the kind of environment around you just isn't that tailored for Azir. He needs to kind of be able to get into the rhythm of the game, and if the game is kind of happening around him, then it can be hard to find your stride. In the case of Ziggs, he just underperforms in mid lane. I don't really recommend him over artillery champions, and for that I just don't really recommend him in general. You can still make bot lane Ziggs work, and if you are comfortable on the champion, then you can play him in the mid lane, but outside of the BDS JNX guy, I think, who's a Ziggs one trick which you see hovering in Master EUS, I don't really see this champion get played that much, other than maybe APA as well in NA solo queue. Moving on to the C tier then, I've added Nidley and GP. So in the case of Nidley, she is a pretty newcomer to the mid lane, which is going to lead her win rate to be incredibly deflated. She's an incredibly hard champion to pilot. I think the genuine strengths of this champion are real, and she can be really good if piloted really well. But for the moment, she's low down. I don't think she's good for average play. I think you are also needing to pick her conditionally. I think if you play her with the wrong pairings, or in certain situations where you're just not going to get as much value of the kit, she does become substantially worse compared to other options. And with that difficulty tax, she is just a pick I don't really recommend unless you are Master Plus, for example. In case of Gangplank, he's also really hard to play. The buffs kind of promoted him as an option again. I think his pick rate will die back down again by next patch, but for the moment he's a champion that's there. If you come to playing Gangplank, you can play him in the mid lane. If you don't already, then you probably won't pick him up. The buffs weren't enough to kind of bring in a new audience more than anything. It just reignited some of the older players. Brand is just weak at the moment. I don't really recommend the champion, even though this is probably the skill bracket where he should perform best in. He's just an under-the-bar champion. He needs buffs. Jace is an elite skewed AD option. Same goes for Yone. Both these champions have kind of found themselves as like the competitive, like the top end of the competitive AD pool. I think if you're very comfortable on them, they can be very valuable champions. If you're not comfortable with these picks, I just don't really recommend them in their current state. Kassadin sits within the C tier. I think he's a fine counter pick, but I also think there are other counter picks which can work at the moment. If you don't already play him, wouldn't really recommend him at the moment, but he can be good in the right spots. We've also seen him come out every so often in competitive as like a counter pick option. Kiana is just a very elite skewed AD option. If you're not a one trick, this champion tends to massively underperform. And then Bell, final champion within the C tier. This pick has really like been hampered by the fact that the skill max is just unintuitive. Emax is just the correct way to go on this champion, and I believe it's sort of like 80% of her audience still Q maxes. So this pick just has a naturally deflated win rate and just power curve at the moment. I think if you play her correctly, she's actually like an 80 mid laner at the moment, especially if you use her as like a counter pick to like Ari, for example. But the champion is just hampered by the fact that she isn't skill maxed correctly in most situations. Beginning of the B tier, we lead off with Rise, who probably could be dropped down to the C tier next patch. He does just underperform for average elo brackets now. The nerfs are substantial, and he wasn't like a hugely performant champion in this bracket play. His kit just isn't that intuitive in this elo. When you go higher up, the wave clear and the map mobility with the ultimate, the breakpoints, and the comboing all become a lot more like valuable, and for that, he does just do better in elite and competitive, but not really that great for average elo. So don't really recommend the champion. He's definitely weaker and will probably get dropped onto the C tier. If not, do I want to drop him down now? Yeah, I'll leave him at the high end of the C tier. I just don't really recommend him as much anymore. For that, I just won't leave him in the B tier. Morgana, I think, has merit in mid to low elo brackets. She's easy to play. She has a very simplistic wave clear. I think if you pick her in the right compositions and as a counter pick with Black Shield, then she can be valuable. Also, the merit of the champion is she's just very easy to play and has like damage, which is like pretty freely applicable. Sion is a good Stonewall champion. I don't really recommend him because of the fact that he's low agency, but if you are looking for a low agency tank which can just neutralize most matchups, then I think Sion is your best go-to. And if you are comfortable knowing that someone else on your team is going to carry, then I think he's one of the better options you can go to at the moment. Malphite has the flexibility of both tank and AP builds. I think both can be quite good in the right spots. I think generalistically you don't really want to be playing Malphite, especially blind, like he is a counter pick exclusive champion, and if you find those spots, then I think he can definitely increase in value, but that kind of hampers his placement in the tier list. Ari probably could sit towards the middle of the B tier, but I don't really recommend her as much at the moment. She's definitely ended up in a spot where she's a bit more elite and competitively skewed. The champion obviously having the mobility, the pick potential does kind of like amplify her value there. For solo queue, she's gone back to the point where she doesn't really have the damage necessary to kind of like as individually carry games, albeit I think the pick in the right hands can still be really good. I just don't really recommend her as much at the moment, which is why she sits as more like a mid to high end B tier option. Same goes for Talia. She also suffered a nerf going into the MSI patches. The champion was already like most skill brackets not that great. Like, she is an elite skewed champion as is, with the mobility around the map, the wave clear breakpoints. You traditionally find these champions as being more competitively skewed options. The nerf, just knocked her down from the A to the B tier. I still think if you're comfortable on her, she can be really good, and especially if you pair her alongside like a Pantheon in competitive or even in solo queue. But for just playing it as an AP option, solo queue, she's just not as good of an option anymore. Zed, Talon, I think if you're very good at piloting them, if you're like an OTP, then they can be really good picks. Same goes for Akshan. I mean, obviously we see Phantasm have great success playing Akshan on the ladder, and I think if you one trick the champion, he can be incredibly good, but outside of one tricks, you just don't really see action that much. And same goes for the other two AD assassins here. I think you have to just sink a lot of time into them and really know your lethal thresholds to kind of consistently snowball games. I think on the flip side, Fizz is a great AP assassin option as like a counter pick if you don't already play him though, then you're probably not going to pick him up. I don't think he's strong enough to be in that boat at the moment, which is why he is also in the B tier in his current state. Lissandra, another good counter pick option. Also another case of if you don't already play it, you're probably not picking it up. But if you do, then you can sometimes use it as a niche counter pick. Asol is... I don't know. I think the general consensus around Asol is mixed at the moment. I think if you can get a free lane and you can scale up, he can be really good. He stonewalls quite nicely with the E. His damage can actually be quite threatening even earlier on into the game now, with a lot of the power shifting they've done to him. The main thing is though just being able to freely stack, get like consistent ultimates off and kind of use that power. If you're not comfortable playing Asol, he's not the greatest spot at the moment. Like, I think he's been better in the past. But if you're comfortable playing him, you've already put the time in, then yeah, I think this champion in certain spots can be quite valuable for drafts. LeBlanc sits within the B tier. She's doing quite well for like average play compared to where she traditionally does. I think you still need to execute her incredibly well to kind of get the value that some of the A and the S tier options have. But right now, if you're an OTP of the champion, you're probably eating quite well. Like, this champion is in a very decent spot for like, I mean, she's in a good spot for elite, decent spot for average solo queue brackets. Silas, I think, is a good counter pick option. And as for flexibility in like the builds at the moment, you see protobouts, you see rowers, you see storm surge variants. I think it can give you some like a path through like what you need within the game, whether you need that durability, whether you just need that upfront burst. You should still use him as a counter pick at the moment. I don't think he's in a blindable state, which does definitely like hurt him a bit. And I think some of the S tier champions do quite successfully into Silas. But if you want to use him as maybe like a Twisted Fate counter pick, or you want to use him against like a specific matchup, maybe your Aries or something, then I think he can be a good option in that regard. Orianna is just a good to have within your mage pool champion. I think she isn't in her greatest state at the moment, but if your jungler picks something like a Nocturne or a Shaco, then you can combo quite nicely with these champions, and I think she definitely has strength within that regard. So Ori, gonna leave her within the like mid to high end of the B tier. I don't think she's one of the best mid laners at the moment, but I don't think you can really go wrong with this champion, and she does have a lot of useful states. Cassiopeia usually sits higher up, but I don't think she's in her greatest state at the moment. In fact, she's probably been in one of the weaker spots she's been in for a long time. That being said, though, she should have always been a counterpick champion, and right now she is that. Like, if you get her in a counterpick spot against like your Blind Siluses, for example, then I think she is a decent champion. And yeah, not the greatest, just generic option at the moment. Like, I wouldn't recommend learning her, but if you already play her, then yeah, use her as a counterpick in her current state. Gragas is a one-trick champion. If you don't already play him, you shouldn't play him unless you're like willing to sink a lot of time into him. But he is doing better with the mage item buffs at the moment, so just something to be aware of. Vel'Koz's also a pretty heavy OTP champion. Don't really recommend learning him, but if you already have him within your arsenal, he's a good artillery option which can be played against champions which don't really have the tools to punish you, or into certain team comp archetypes. Dropping down is Garen. His pick is just not that great at the moment, and his pick rate is quite heavily deflated within the mid lane. They should buff him next patch, but I think he's just too weak for what he is as a champion. Aurora, I'm also dropping down. She's just a bit too elite skew to kind of recommend as an A tier option in the tier list. I still think she's really good though if you put the time into her and you like understand her combos and how to really abuse lane and like the powerful ultimate within the game. Moving up into the A tier is Aurelia. This champion is in a very strong state, especially early on into the game at the moment, but you have to be an OTP for the most part. If you're not someone, okay, I maybe shouldn't use OTP quite as much, but you need to have had a lot of, like, put a lot of time into her. Like, if you haven't already put the time into her, she probably isn't worth learning at the moment, but if you have, then, yeah, she's in a great state, and I would recommend playing her. Vex is a great counterpick option, has been doing decently for quite a while now. I mean, I recommend the pick if you already play her. Maybe not if you don't. Like, I think she does require some level of mastery and understanding to kind of get the value out of her. Cho'Gath I've been watching for a bit, and I'm kind of tempted to drop him down to the B tier. He's just not performing that well in mid lane at the moment, even with the, like, Chevalier and your, like, Halo Blades variants. I still think he's a good tank option, though, and great scaling, which does promote him, like, better as an average elo option. He's just not quite as good at the moment, and might get dropped down next patch. I'll leave him as, like, a lower A tier option, though, in his current state. Quinn sits within the A tier. I think if you're on OTP, she's a great option. If you don't already play her, you're probably not going to play her. Annie sits within the A tier at the moment. Really benefited from the changes she received in one of the previous patches, or she's received like 3 lots of changes. The first one left her too weak, the second one left her too strong. They then did some like shift arounds of power, and she's in a more balanced state for solo queue. Obviously the guaranteed CC, the kind of like very core identity of the champion makes her a great pick just to have within your arsenal. Good lockdown, the summon can be really powerful in Tibbers, and yeah, I think she's a very solid A tier option at the moment. Veigar is an A tier option for mid to low elo. Does suffer the higher up you go, like sits more like a B tier option. He can sit in the low end of the A tier at the moment. I still recommend him for these this elo bracket. Anivia, usually stronger, not doing as well at the moment, sits as more like a counter pick A tier option. Nico lost a decent chunk of power with the changes she received in 25.12. Kind of means that as like a mid to low end A tier option in mid lane is even less popular now. Like her mid lane pick rate's really deflated. You probably get the strength of just people not being as familiar with how to play against the champion these days. A lot of her damage is obviously like early game skewed, even when they took away that 20 damage on flat Q. 20 damage early on Q, that was meaningful, but she does still have a lot of tools to kind of abuse champions, which just don't really have the ability to like dodge her, like her CC or like her Q, for example. Heimerdinger benefits from not being popular. Same goes for Kennen. Both these champions are just not that common mid lane, and it's to the strengths. People just won't know how to play against them. The guaranteed shove with Heimerdinger a lot of the time can be really oppressive, and the just overall combos and like harass of Kennen just give him a lot of strength. He also scales relatively well at the moment, and has good keystone flexibility. Neferi, also, same as Heimerdinger, has the strength for people just not really knowing how to play against it in lane. This champion obviously is quite popular in jungle still. Well, I say popular, relatively normal in jungle. She's not that popular anymore, but yeah, it does have clear strengths in her kit. Her mid lane is definitely like considerably weaker though at the moment, and yeah, sits as more like a mid to low end A tier option. I think she'd probably be a B tier if she was more popular, because people would have a better understanding of how to play against mid lane Neferi. Katarina sits an A tier option at the moment. She's really good in the hands of OTPs. Like, if you're good at the champion, she's very good in her current state, and is probably like a go-to guarantee pick. If you're not someone who's like an OTP, like I think Katarina is probably the definitive OTP mid lane champion, then you probably won't play her. That's just how it goes with this champion. You have to sink so much time into her to really be rewarded, but if you don't already play her, then it's probably not worth picking her up. Akali sits within the A tier. This is the AP assassin, which I do recommend picking up, because I think she has a lot of spots where she can be played, and is a very valuable champion to have within your pool. Victor, also another pick which I just recommend having within your pool. I think he has a lot of clear strengths. The early game harass of this champion combined with the mid game strengths are very clear, and if you can get to those stacking thresholds, I think this champion is a very strong pick at the moment. Syndra, Wei, great mage options. Syndra not doing as well at the moment, kind of reflected through her competitive pick rate. She just isn't that popular compared to some of the other options, but I still think if you can like find the right spots where she just isn't really going to be punished, you can freely throw out EQs and then just combo with the ultimate. I think this champion can still be really valuable. Zerf is the like definitive artillery option within the A tier at the moment. I think this champion, if you need a range pick, is really good, and yeah, it's a great counter pick to some certain like archetype or like team comp archetypes which just can't really punish your long range harass and poke. Lux is a great A tier option. Kind of flew under the radar for a while, even though she is still really popular. But it's kind of been picked up a bit more within mid to higher MMR brackets at the moment. I think her general kit is really strong, has really high burst potential, great wave clear, and it just gives her good tools to kind of play with in the mid lane. Swain is a great counterpick option. We saw Honku play it yesterday against T1. Looked really good. I think the champion is really good if you pick him in the right spots where team comps just don't really have the tools to kind of output the burst or have the percentage cut down to kind of knock him down in fights, and he can just freely get multiple R rotations off and play to his strengths. Malzahar sits within the A tier primarily because of just how easy he is. I think if he wasn't that easy, he would just be a more like a B tier option, but his freedom of wave clear, his point and click lockdown with his ultimate just gives him the freedom to kind of play like just gives him the tools he really wants. Like it trivializes one of the biggest struggles which mid to low MMR players have, and that is very clear strength of the champion. at the moment. Zoe sits within the A tier. I think if you put the time into her, she's a clear S, maybe even S plus option. Like, she's one of the best solo queue champions in the game at the moment, but it's hard to play. Like, you have to combo correctly on this champion. You have to understand like how to clear waves and how to play around your summon as well rotations, because if you don't, then the pick definitely loses a lot of its strength. Pantheon moves up to the S tier, so he now leads off the S tier. I think he's an incredible counter pick to Assassins, and Assassins traditionally are quite popular within the mid lane. He also just generally is in a decent spot at the moment, being a full-way flex pick. I think if you want to play him in the jungle, if you want to play him within the mid lane, or even top lane, I think this pick is in a very good state at the moment. Yasuo is still probably my recommended AD option, and most people play Yasuo. This pick is incredibly popular for, I mean, like clear reasons. Like, he is very, very skill expressive. He has great tools within his kit. Pairs really nicely with certain champions, and I think that just makes him a very clear S2 option, especially at the moment when his just general power is quite strong. KO is a great scaling option. Same goes for Vladimir. Like, I think these picks scale incredibly well at the moment. But as KO doesn't translate quite as well for higher MMR brackets, like, she is more of the low elo, like, skewed champion on this list. But I think she is very clearly powerful at the moment, especially when they reduced the price of Nashers and Rabadons. It very much just amplified why she is good in the current meta. The two AP assassin options are Diana and Echo. I think both these picks are really good at the moment. Echo is probably slightly higher than Diana, but both these champions with like Lichbane, Rocket Bell, are very clearly strong in their current states. Diana, you can opt into like some of those more durability items, or like Bruiser-esque items with like your Leandries and your Rift Bakers, albeit you shouldn't do that in most games. Most games you are just playing the AP burst and just kind of taking over the game through that. Galio is my recommended AP counter pick. I think the champion is still very, very good just to have within your pool. Great at nullifying a lot of the melee AP options, like your Fizzes, your Dianas, your Echoes, your Silases, shit like that. Galio is great into it, and I really do recommend him as a counter pick into those situations. And you could even opt into like those more burst orientated builds of Electrocute and Storm Surge. And then Twisted Fate, got enough this patch. It's definitely a bit weaker. For elite bracket to play, he's probably number one still. For more like for average to like mid to low elo, I think this pick does sit in amongst the S tier. I don't think he's for clear definitive number one, because you do have to put some games into him to understand kind of how to use the card rotations, how to use your ultimate effectively, your wave clear breakpoints. These are all quite crucial aspects of the champion. And once you've got that done, I think he's a great pick at the moment. So I do recommend learning him if you haven't already. But there are a relatively large pool of S tier options at the moment, which I do recommend trying out if you haven't already. Those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.